talk about the identification in great detail, because there are some things out there that you could get confused with really early in the season, really early, right now. The whole life cycle and several different control methods. All right, so, there we go. I have a pointer stick of science. Anybody remember Bill Nye the Science Guy? All right, so I'm just asking that as a rhetorical question for right now. We're going to cover that later, I think. But this is 2016 Purgatory Park. It's the Riley parcel. Anybody familiar with Purgatory Park? Anyway, the Riley parcel was donated to the city of Minnetonka. And 2016 is a key year. I will be telling you about 2016 a couple slides later. And this is big, huge infestation. And that white fence is where we brought in goats to do a goat trial. And they ate all the wildflowers in addition to the garlic mustard. So what you see here, we're trying to restore. Anyway, so they do have their place. They do have their place, but we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about, this is the outline. What is an invasive species? A whole bunch of garlic mustard facts, where it came from, as far as its native range. The plant life cycle review. We have to do that because there's different things out there and everybody has a different background. We're going to talk about the garlic mustard biennial life stages. And there's a lot of different life stages, and if you really key on those, you can save yourself a lot of time and work. Plant ID features and control methods will be last. Okay. We're going to mix, some of those are going to be mixed up. All right. So it was introduced to North America from Europe. So what is an invasive species? A lot of people have different ideas about that, and I'm just a stickler when it comes to when someone calls a native plant invasive, because the native plant originated on this continent when the glaciers receded 10,000 years ago. There was 10,000 years of these plants and insects and animals to co-evolve together with checks and balances. So if an animal or an insect starts to eat a plant, the plant might create a plant chemical that would make it a little bit less palatable, and things like that, and there was enough diversity and enough, when I was a kid, they used to call it the food chain, the top of the food chain ate the next one, but there's really a food web that's all interconnected. And all of those organisms in one continent co-evolve together. So if you take a plant or an animal from one continent on the other side of the ocean and bring it to another continent where it did not co-evolve with everything else, once in a while something goes awry, and that plant might have nothing that eats it. No insects, no animals. All of a sudden it has a distinct advantage over the native plants who are eaten by the animals. And then the other thing, well, I'm getting. So it's very distinct in that it did not come from this continent, and it outcompetes the native plants. Does that make sense? It's got a distinct advantage. Alrighty. So 1868, it's been here about 150 years. It was found in Long Island, New York. We shouldn't say first recorded. Well, it was actually imported because people used it as a pot herb. It's extremely nutritious. Very, very nutritious. It's very bitter. A lot of bitter herbs are very nutritious. And so, yes, you can have as much as you want, just don't plant it. People have been sharing it over the decades. They see this nice little white flower that just showed up in their yard, and oh, would you like some of this? Yeah, you've got it for a long time now. It's very prolific. So, we covered that. There we go. Here's just some facts and a question. So it's non-native, it's fast-growing, rapidly spreading. It's a biennial. I'm going to cover that in great detail. Herbaceous, no woody part about it. It's cool season. So it's a biennial that forms, it forms dense colonies. It's cool season, meaning it thrives in really cool weather. And then if it's really hot weather, it'll simply go dormant, but it's still alive. It's not dying. Anyway, why is it so successful in North America? That's part of the question about what we just talked about the nothing that eats it, right? So these are rosette plants, autumn of the first growing season. So we're going to discuss in detail the biennial life cycle. The first year it grows as a rosette on the ground, and the second year it sends up a flowering stalk and it flowers and goes to seed. More garlic mustard facts. So there's no known natural enemies in North America, but guess what? They're finding a little gray aphid, and I've even seen it in Minnetonka that's been feeding on it. So they're, I think it might be the university. I don't know who's collecting the data, but I've seen it, and it's actually doing a little damage to the plant. I mean, it's not, but wouldn't that be interesting? So that's a piece of research. But there was a PhD postdoc, Laura Van Riper, who had a research project that's been ongoing. The University of Minnesota and the DNR was ongoing for about 20 years, where when they want to introduce, I'm going to talk a little bit about biological control later, so I might be jumping the gun, but she had research plots in Hilloway Park and went and collected data every single year, and she would record how much feeding was on the leaves. Nothing, 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 nothing. It's interesting. All right, I'll talk more about that later. Oops, I go back here. It's self-fertile. Isn't that interesting? It does not need to be cross-pollinated. So if an animal has, if say it's a deer and it's got a seed stuck to it, it comes onto your property, the seed drops off, the plant grows up. When it flowers, it does not need to be cross-pollinated, and all of a sudden, it's dispersing seeds all over. Wow, there aren't very many wildflowers like that. So that's a distinct advantage. It grows on all different kinds of soil types. Survives, survives, survives. Extremely drought tolerant. I'm saying especially spring 2009. That's kind of a long time ago. But guess what? We just had a drought last year and the year before. We were 10 inches down on rain at the first snowfall last fall. 10 inches down. That's a lot. That's a serious drought. We didn't have much rain last summer at all. But yet, we got moisture replenished through the snow, and so we brought some samples that I'll be showing on display. That it just went dormant, and then it started to thrive when it got enough moisture. All right. We have generations. We have just 2 generations, because it's a biennial. It lives for 2 years. Well, a year and a half, 2 growing seasons. And so you can see both stages, first-year plants and second-year plants, from April of one year to July of the next year. And they're overlapping. So I'm going to go through all of that. So right now, we went out today, and these look just like bean sprouts. Do you see this? It's like you went to the grocery store and you bought bean sprouts. Those just germinated, brand new. That's the first-year plant that just germinated. And the second-year plant looks like a rosette right now. So the first-year plant grows into this rosette, goes through winter as a rosette. It comes out of winter as a rosette. And if we look in here, we'll see some stalks that are going to grow up and produce flower. All right, you're going to hear this over and over again because you really got to learn all of this. All right, so I have to go back to the story. In 2015, we had 60-degree temperatures in December. And I was going to have a nervous breakdown. All the native plants had gone completely dormant. It's December, and we're out there doing buckthorn control. It's 60 degrees, and the garlic mustard is growing in December. And I just went, oh my gosh, what is it going to be like in the spring? So here's a picture from the spring, and that's 7 times the root mass of a normal garlic mustard. So here's a normal garlic mustard, 1 taproot, and that's got 7 taproots on it. And that was from that, I literally was going to have a nervous breakdown that year, and that's why I got so many. Never mind. Anyway, so it was there it is. Record-sized roots. Covered all that. The roots, yep. Okay, covered it. So it's so bad because it crowds out the native wildflowers and sedges. That's what you know, the invasive species. So, you know, it can be there because it does die back, and by late summer, it's turning brown and shriveling up and sprinkling gobs of seeds all over the place. So some of the native plants under there can survive for a few years because they'll get a half a season of light, but over time they just get crowded out completely. So it reduces native plant diversity. So when you think about going to the grocery store and you go in and there's only iceberg lettuce, how about that? Nothing else to pick from in the grocery, in the produce department. I mean, that's what an invasive species is like. It just wipes out all the diversity and there's nothing else. So there's insects that have evolved with all of our native flowering plants. Take the rusty patch bumblebee, for example, which is here in Minnetonka, which is an endangered species. That needs our spring wildflowers right away in the spring. And then there's a succession of wildflowers that are blooming all throughout the whole season that pollinators need that diversity. And if there's a monoculture, it's bad news for the pollinators and for the wildlife that don't eat it. And here's the really bad part that gives me nervous, makes me really nervous too, is that the few wildflowers that do survive are native, and the native animals and the native deer eat them to death. And so there is, just right down the road at Burwell House, Minnetonka Mills Park, we have some master naturalists who adopted a spot in that woods. We call it Mills Oak Woods. And there was, and I have pictures of them taking garlic mustard out in 2014. And when it took out, there was false Solomon seal that was above my knee. And it was a 40-foot patch. It's about from here to the door. And so he took out the garlic mustard, and just a few years later, the whole thing was gone, eaten by deer, the whole thing. So that gets discouraging. But now we have climate change, and we can be doing some other things, you know, going back more toward maybe savanna plantings, savanna seeding, that kind of thing. So I'm going to have to just let go of some of those wildflowers, I guess. So where did garlic mustard come from? This is a very old map. This is back in the days when I was taking pictures for my carousel slideshow. Anyway, so the native range is through much of Europe, from United Kingdom to Ukraine. United Kingdom, I got my clicker. Let's see if I got my clicker. Anyway, United Kingdom's the upper left. Ukraine is over to the right. Goes from Sweden all the way down to Italy, across northern Africa, and even into India and Sri Lanka. So it's got a broad range, but guess what? You go over to its native range, and it's just another wildflower in the woods. It's not a monoculture because it evolved there. Okay. So here we are. This is already getting to be an outdated map. EDD is a nationwide mapping system of invasive species, and that is where it is in the United States at that time. 39 states, including Alaska, and 4 Canadian provinces at that time. Now here's one thing that's a little bit deceiving. In northern Minnesota, you know, St. Louis County is our biggest county, right? Way up there by Duluth. Can you turn this on for me, my dear friend? Thank you. I know. So if you look up in northern Minnesota, I usually have, you know where Duluth is, right? St. Louis County is that huge block up there. You know, garlic mustard is in Duluth, but it doesn't go all the way to the Boundary Waters. So that's a nice thing to know.
It was right over here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Now all right. So now we're going to do a plant life cycles review, because everything that you have, I'm assuming that you all have a woodland of some sort, right? And you have, the one nice thing about Minnetonka is that when people have the larger properties, there's usually some portion of your woods that was never bulldozed when they built your house. Is that right? That is what's cool, because when you take out the invasive species, many times there are roots left over in the ground that will come back when you take the invasive species out. So Jack in the Pulpit's one of the very first ones to come back, and false Solomon seal comes back. But anyway, so when you're working out in your woods, it's good to know what's an annual, what's a biennial, what's a perennial, and then we have woody perennial, and I bring that up specifically because there's a woody perennial that is a wonderful replacement plant for garlic mustard if you don't have a big budget and you want, because nature abhors a vacuum, right? You take something out, something else wants to take its place. It just does not want to be bare. So the annual example, the annuals are like the bedding plants that you buy in the store, and they're dead when it freezes, right? An annual, if it's in the wild, it's going to germinate from a seed this season. It's going to grow up. It's going to flower. It's going to produce its seed, and it's going to die when it freezes. That's it. It's done. It's over. That's an annual. A biennial lives for 2 years, and garlic mustard falls into that biennial, which is why it's bold. I already mentioned before, and I'm being redundant on purpose, it will germinate the first year. Right now, it's germinating. It will form a rosette. The first year, it's not going to do anything other than be a rosette on the ground. And then the second year, it will send up a flowering stalk. Now, one good question for myself is that all biennials like that? Almost every biennial that I know of that's native behaves like that. The second year is the flowering stalk. All right. Perennial is like the perennials in your garden, like your hostas. If you have hostas, you plant it, it's there, and it's going to come back up every year. It might be getting bigger in diameter. You buy your hosta small, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Some of our wildflowers do that. Some of them don't. Just depends. But the perennial's coming back every year. But it's herbaceous, and it's dying back down to the ground. The reason I bring woody perennial is because our native woodbine vine, as the foresters call it woodbine, and the people in the nursery trade call it Virginia creeper. It's a five-part compound leaf. I'll show you a picture. And it does climb trees, but it's very docile. It's not as aggressive as the wild grapevine. It's got little fine tendrils. You can easily pull it off of a plant cage. And if you put it down on the ground, maybe put some sticks on top of it, it will root at the nodes and form a ground cover. And wow, that's your instant ground cover after you take garlic mustard out. It can be aggressive, but we'll talk about that too. I mean, if you have bare areas that have nothing there, that's your good starter plant for a cover crop until you decide what you want to plant later. Does that make sense? Because nature abhors a vacuum. You want something to be covering that space up. So here we go. Now we have the garlic mustard biennial life cycle. So I already told you, I'm being really redundant, so a lot of that, as I've already said before. On the left is the rosette in the summer of the first year. On the right, here's a caveat. So I've literally been watching garlic mustard for 20 years. 20 years. This is the first year that garlic mustard is not blooming the first week in May. I choose the week that we have this workshop specifically so that you can go out and start pulling it right away in your yard, but it's not flowering. It's just amazing. We've had cool springs before, but this is really a cool one. So we dug out the samples that we have to show you the stages that it's on the south-facing slopes versus the north-facing slopes. The south-facing slopes develop much faster because they're warmer, and the north come later. So when we have people out controlling, that's what we're paying attention to in the parks. We've got to hit all. It's not go to this park, and then when that park's done, go to this park. It's going to be get the south-facing slopes on this part, and then we'll keep going around and around. Does that make sense? All right. So we already talked about a lot of this. Let's see here. So we got the seedling, the summer, the plant overwinters. Oh, plant overwinters green. I'll show you a picture of that. Second year plant, rosette early spring. Then it bolts, sends up that flower stalk, flowers, the leeks. I'm going to show you pictures of every single one of those stages. And after we look at a couple of it. So this is Leonard Fuchs, who lived in the 1500s, and he was a German botanist, and he illustrated the root. And it's very interesting. The root kind of makes an S-curve. And part of the root, I'm so nervous about this thing because, there we go. Last time it just would advance 5 slides all at one time. Okay, there's an S-curve. Part of this, so here's the leaf up here. Part of the root actually sticks out of the ground, maybe about 1 centimeter, and then it usually creates an S-curve. And so there's some S. You can come and look at the samples as you wish, but there are some good curves in here. If you can see these, A little bit of an S-curve. Can you see that? Oh, sure. Would you be willing to get that little plant tray? That little plant, remember that little thing from the office? We'll have a couple of these with these little S-curves. There, it's right, it's on the table, I think. Yeah, here it is. You can just pass this around. Oh. There, just like that.
Hiding on the other side.
Yeah, okay. So that's pretty characteristic. You might not see it every time, but it's pretty characteristic. All right, so here's the first year plant in the rosette stage. They're bright to dark green, kidney shaped. I don't exactly like that word, but they're, the botanical term orbicular means if you drew a circle around that leaf, would most of that leaf fit the outside of that circle? And that's pretty much the case. It's pretty round. It's got some lookalikes at this time of state, but it's a wavy tooth margins. Now here's where we got to really pay attention because there's some lookalikes, and you see these teeth? Those are teeth at the margin of the leaf. They are rounded at the top of the tooth, and they're rounded at the bottom of the tooth. Can you see that? I'm going to repeat it in other slides. I've got one, and I'm going to give it to you as soon as I'm going to go through some, and then I'm going to hand it out because I didn't want to have all the answers. I wanted to have it be a little, yeah. So this is a picture of one fall where we had a lot of moisture. Look at the size of that leaf. They can actually be the size of a paper plate sometimes when we have a lot of moisture. And when it's really dry, they're going to be, you know, the size of a quarter or a $50. So they're very variable in size, depending on how much moisture they get. Okay, now, I gave you the answers. Before it used to, all right, so we can have this handout right now. Garlic, mustard, look-alike leaves. Would you be willing, Carissa, to hand these out?
Yep.
So the answers are there.
You keep the master copy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so right now, out in the woods, we've been walking out, pruning cherry black knot disease and seeing the development of the early spring flowers, and these are all up right now. So this is a look-alike leaf. I already told you, and this is the key, the point, the arrow is rounded on the top, and it's rounded at the bottom of the tooth. See the wrinkles on the leaf surface? It's a pretty wrinkly leaf. The only leaf that's more wrinkled that's out there right now is motherwort. Now, motherwort is a perennial, and it does not have an orbicular leaf shape. You see that? It's got a maple-like leaf. But I just wanted to show you that that's another leaf plant that's out right now that you could get garlic mustard confused with that has wrinkly leaves. This one is invasive as well. Did everybody get one? Yep. Pardon me? Are you taking questions throughout? Yes, I am, if it's related to that slide. If it's not related to that slide, we'll wait till the end.
The first year picture of the rosette, it's not spreadable when you walk around that first year. It spreads when the seed pods are out, right?
Exactly. Okay, so the question was, the first year it's not spreading because it's just staying in that rosette stage. Yes, it is. The only time it's doing any spreading, and it's not spreading by underground rhizomes. It stays as a taproot. It's only spreading by seed. So we're going to talk plenty about that. But I think because it's being filmed, we're not going to do any, I think we should wait till the end for questions. Is that okay? All right, so here's some more lookalikes. Here's our wild violet, which is orbicular, just like garlic mustard, but those are very tiny teeth, and there's nothing rounded at the bottom. Okay? So this is, and yeah. So here we have a buttercup species. It's a kidney leaf buttercup, rounded at the leaf top, the tooth top, and pointed at the tooth bottom. So you really got to pay attention to detail. Here, this one looks really a lot like garlic mustard, but again, the tooth is pointed at the bottom. In between the teeth, it's pointed, not rounded. And then, if you went to start pulling this, Creeping Charlie is Renner's along the surface of the soil, and it will root at the nodes, no taproot. It's just very different root system from garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is a white, distinct taproot, and Creeping Charlie is a Renner. So, There you go. You have that handout, and that is pretty helpful, don't you think? I think so. All right. A second year, the plant teeth change a little bit on the flowering stalk. It'll be the same at the base as a rosette when it first greens up in the spring, but then when it produces a flowering stalk, it gets a little bit more triangular like this and a little bit more pointed. But you already, by the time it gets to this point, you already know your plant pretty darn well. You don't have to be confused. All right, there. I think we're good with that. All right, so here we have what the first year plant looks like right now. Usually it's in April, beginning of May. It's a seedling, and by the end of the first year, this is what it looks like. It can be a complete ground cover if there's a lot of seed at the end of the first year. But you don't worry about those because they're not producing seed. So garlic mustard lives 1.3 years in Minnesota from the time it germinates up here until it flowers next year and drops seed by, it's usually dead by July. All right? There we go. So look at that. That's what it overwinters like. It stays green under the snow. It does not have to spend any energy producing new leaves when the snow melts. It gives enough growing degree days, it'll perk itself right up, and it has an advantage over our native plants because it's already existing there and it's not having to leaf out. It'll produce more leaves. Then it firms up just like this. It has a garlic odor when it's crushed. If you're walking through the woods and you start to smell that garlicky smell or oniony smell, you've usually got garlic mustard there. All right, then it starts to bolt. No flowers here, it's bolting. It's a solid ground cover that now turns into a field of bolting plants, and both of those are bolting. And that always occurs in May. I'm astonished that it hasn't progressed that yet. And here we are in the flowers. This is the beginning of the flowering stage. It's supposed to be happening right now. This is a perfect time to go out and pull garlic mustard. So here's an observation I've had over the years, and anyone who's pulled a lot of garlic mustard. It's really interesting. Before it reaches the flowering stage, it's kind of hard to get out of the ground. So if you start to pull it, you can feel that it's going to break off. And if it breaks off, you just turned a biennial plant into a perennial plant. Unless you've got a trowel right there and you're going to dig that root out, if you've got a trowel. So it's a really good idea if every time you're out there to have a trowel with you in case the root does not come out. If it broke off last year and you didn't dig it out, it's not going to pull the next year because now it's got a weak attachment, which, if we stay later and you want to talk about that, I can show you how it produces buds on the root itself, and they're weakly attached. So next year, so once a plant breaks off, you have to dig it out. And if you don't, it's just going to be coming back year after year after year after year. And you turn a biennial into a perennial by not allowing it to go to seed. So if you pull the top off and it doesn't go to seed this year, it's coming back. It wants to produce seed. Once it flowers, produces seed, the seed ripens, it sends a hormonal message, my life cycle is complete, plant starts to shut down. But does that make sense? I'm seeing a lot of nodding, so I think that's good. Stem continues to bolt, mature plant. The height can range from 6 inches to 4 feet tall. Isn't that amazing? So if we had plenty of soil moisture and it's an open, no competition, so you saw that dense patch in the last slide, I think. That's a lot of competition, so there are going to be a lot of narrow plants. But if there's one growing all by itself and it's got plenty of sunlight, it'll start to produce side branches. And I definitely want you to come and see this plant. This is the biggest one we dug. It was on the south-facing slope. And boy, they just get happy if there's enough nice moisture. It's got at least 4 flowering stalks. 4 flowering stalks. So it will actually, some of the larger ones will get tall and they'll have multiple stalks and almost look like a shrub in a way. So it can be really big, it can be really small, depending on the moisture and the temperature. Alrighty? So now, as it continues to flower, the flowering structure expands and elongates. So the top of the flower will still have little flowers up here. But down here at the bottom, those flowers are starting to turn into these, they look like mini green beans. You see these? Those are called the seed pods. The actual botanical term is a salique. But once those seed pods are present, they have to come off. Now, if you pay attention to detail, you don't have to bag the whole plant. But if you can't pay attention to detail, you do have to bag the whole plant. Because what you have to do, and this is my practice, I will gather these plants up, and this is what I'm normally doing in the workshop because it's flowering right now, and I will gather them like a bouquet of flowers, and the flower comes out the top, the part that has the seed pods on it. I'm going to back up. I went too fast. This last slide, where it's just in the flowering stage, I kind of digressed a little bit. I'm going to go back here. So before that flower starts to expand and produce a seed pod, you do not need to bag this plant. There is no seeds there. You see that? There's no seed pods. So if you can get this plant out of the ground, you can leave it high and dry somewhere to dry out in the woods. I usually pick a log. I'll look up and see, is there a little sun coming through here? Okay, I'll put it up on top of a log, on top of a rock. Sometimes we'll put a bunch in the crotch of a branch, just so it's going to be up there and it's going to dry out. And it's not going to produce seed. And you can leave it right there on site. By the end of the summer, they're going to look straw-colored and dead, and you can just drop them right on the ground. You don't have to bag them up. That's a lot of saving time if you've got 1/4 of an acre of garlic mustard. That's worth coming to this workshop right there to know. And here we are. Normally it's flowering right now. You've got a window of time. And if you feel nervous about being able to get it out, you've got from May 1st, I say 4th of July because everybody can remember 4th of July. The seed pods start splitting open in July. But you've got 2 full months. So I mean, if you wanted to make a little math problem and make a little grid of your property and just divide it up into grids, how much can I get done in a half an hour? You've got quite a bit of time to get that out. And so the more you can get out at this stage, if you get all the soil off the root system, you don't need to bag it. All right, now we go back. Okay, now once you're at this point, then you would have to take care of the seed tops. And I think I'm going to talk more about that later. I'm just going through the life cycle. Now once the flowers are done, this one is the one on the left is at Public Works out in full sun. If they're in full sun, they might turn a little bit purplish. Over here, when the seed pods they're getting thicker and thicker, and at some point you can actually see the little bumps, just like you can in a green bean. The little seeds inside. So it's starting to ripen seed. That absolutely has to go in a bag or get composted. It can't be left to sprinkle out in the woods. And here's just another example. It has to be dealt with. We'll talk more about that. Okay. Seeds ripen. The plant turns yellow, then brown. So then the plant is dying. Now, once they're in the seed pod stage, you do not spray or weed whip. If you weed whip, you're just going to be spreading seeds all over the place. Even if the seed pods are not open yet, and you weed whip, it's going to lay on the ground, and the seed pods are going to open at some point. This is like the bionic plant. Those of us who are old enough to remember those old sci-fi movies, the whatever organism from outer space that wouldn't die, whatever you tried to do, it wouldn't die. So you can take this plant out of the ground. You can pull it if you lay it down on the ground. I have taken them at a size that's not that mature, pulled them out and put them on my cold, dark garage floor, and by the end of the summer, there's ripe seeds in those pods. So you cannot leave them out in the woods with pods. Does that make sense? Life cycle is complete, the plant begins to die, but the seeds are alive. Cannot weed whip, cannot spray, and I've seen people spray. Woo! No, do not. All right, enough on that. So here's the seed pods. This is a burdock in the background to give you some depth, and they're starting to split open in July. It's a salique, and the 2 little sides will come off, and the black seeds are there. And the seeds, the latest, I haven't looked at the research lately, but the research from talking to Laura Van Riper, who had the study in Hilloway Park, said that the seeds could last for 11 years in the soil. So I've seen these. When I first started this job, all those years ago, I saw this much germination, and I thought, well, heck, we're going to have this taken care of because they're all germinating right now. I mean, but there are places in the parks where we have been pulling for 15 years. And it's definitely gone down, but you never get them all. And so there's always something dispersing seed every year. So it's nice when you own a finite piece of property, your property, because you can, one gal, she was so sweet, she sat in the workshop and she said, I would just, after work, get a glass of wine and I'd just go stroll through my yard and pull garlic mustard. And everybody started laughing. And yeah, you surely can do that because it's a finite area. You don't have to, you know you can get through it if you figure out how much time you can spend, make a little grid, that kind of thing. Just don't want, this is what you do not want to happen. Alrighty, so here is what the seed pods look like after they have dispersed. So this is a dry site. It was a dry summer, so you see the first year plants on the bottom layer here are the rosettes. That's next year's plant. These are the ones that flowered this year and dispersed all their seed. So that's the end of the summer. Okay. I was covered with first year rosettes. So what should I be saying? I'll cover that later. So that's the end of that life cycle. So we just went through that biennial life cycle from the beginning all the way to the end. So now we're talking about control methods. We've got several control methods. Manual is number one for being sure you got it. So you can spray, you can weed whack, but there are disadvantages with everything. So I'll explain the disadvantages. The number one way to control this plant is manual. If you've got acres of it, that's not realistic. So that's why we talk about some of the other ways that you can control it. So we have manual, we have mechanical, which is basically weed whack. Or when I say, yeah, brush blade. Using a brush blade on a weed whacker, that's pretty much it. Chemical herbicide, it is not a cure-all. I'll explain how you can do it at the right time. The right time is just about right now. Usually it's late April. It's when it's in the rosette stage and has not yet bolted. And biological control. So that's what we're going to talk about. And here we go. May and June. I always get phone calls about buckthorn in May and June. The first question I ask, I don't answer the buckthorn question. I say, do you have garlic mustard on your property? I don't know. Time to find out. Because May and June is the time to work on garlic mustard. And very conveniently, buckthorn's not taking the herbicide stump treatment into its ground and into its stump in May and June. It's so perfectly convenient to have those two flip-flop. So we got to shift gears completely. All right, manual control, hand pulling and digging. So we pretty much already discussed most of that about how it, I think what's happening, the process of bolting is spending plant energy, and I think that root is shrinking a little bit, which makes it easier to pull. Because before the flowering, it's really sticking hard. And then it's sometimes, if the ground is moist, many times, so what you do is you put your two fingers, the plant, there's a little S-curve. I'm going to walk around here a little bit. So there's a little S-curve here, right at the top. And this top ½ an inch is usually sitting out of the ground. You know, there might be some leaf litter. You just bend down and you move the leaf litter around. You find that spot and you start to really slowly pull. If it's moist ground, it should come out pretty good. But sometimes it doesn't, and when it doesn't, then you got to go and dig and get the root. Okay? If it's dry ground, it's going to bust off. And so you just got to know that in advance. So it's a good idea to have a trowel, hand trowel with you. It's like some people call them a garden digger. And so that's what you do. No seed pods are formed yet. Roots are soil free. So if you shake all the soil off the roots and you gather them into a bundle, and I usually will put the root side up so that the roots are for sure to dry out. You just put those in the spots that I told you about before. In the crotch of a tree, on a log, on a rock, that type of thing. Okay? No need to bag. And so this is what we do in the field. So this is over at Burwell House. We pulled it all, and you see there's a log here on the left, and the roots are up. All those little tap roots are facing up, and the top are facing down. There's no seed pods out here, and it's just going to dry and turn into a little straw-colored clump. There's a branch that's on the ground. All of these are off, and there's air circulation getting in there, and they can be there. and then they shrink down. It's a lot nicer than having to stuff plastic bags, if you can pay attention to detail. It's another thing too. Now this is interesting. So now it's in the flowering stage, and we're doing this, and there's a curb, and the roots are up here, and they're in the air, getting air circulation. But isn't this interesting? The plant's got a lot of energy in those stems and leaves, and that's where the bionic plant comes in. I mean, it's continuing to curve around, continuing to flower, but they are going to die. They're still so small in the flowering stage that by the time if it were to produce a little tiny seed pod, that's about how far it would get, and it wouldn't continue anymore. But isn't that interesting, how the plant will just continue to grow? So if those roots were on moist ground, then they'd still continue. Or if it's rainy for a period of time, if it's rainy, they'll continue to grow. It's an amazing plant. All right, so this is the year 2016 when we had the monster roots, 2016 or 2017. So I'm just showing you, this is an illustration. They've got the buds. So if you break off the top, you don't get the root out and you break it off, you've got these little buds down here that are going to be next year's plant. But when they send those up, it's going to be a wimpy stem in here that is going to break off. So I already covered that. Does that make sense? So that is going to be a perennial every year until you get that root out. Okay? All righty. Okay. So this is a multi-stem plant. You see that? That's going to have 5, 6 flowering stalks. It's going to be, it was probably had no competition. Yep, same place we dug those today. No competition. And it had lots of sunshine to branch out and produce multiple taproots and multiple stems. So here's some of our geocache volunteers. We're so fortunate to have some different groups in Minnetonka that really are dedicated. And so now, I'm not looking, we're seeing right now that it's in the flower bud stage right here. So that's okay, but we see this in the back. This is from a year previous where we didn't get there in the flower bud stage and we had seed pods. So then we had to compost on site. And so the Department of Agriculture does not want us spreading seeds of noxious weeds around. And they really would like it if you've got plants that have seed pods to make a compost pile on your property. And if you've got a piece of woods, what I typically will look for, maybe a little depression area. You know, you've got a little bit of, and where there's not much growing, it might be too dark for a lot of things to grow. And then I will just dump all of the, I gather the plants as I'm pulling them, and all the seed tops are on the top. And when you get a handful, just put it tip down into a little depression. You can dig yourself a little pit if you want to. That's going to be your compost area. And then it's a really good idea to cover it with landscape fabric, not plastic. The fabric will allow the moisture to go through and the composting process to happen, but it's not going to heat up. So there's going to be viable seeds in that pile. So if you brought it to a compost facility that is being turned by a big machine and it gets up to a temperature, those seeds will not be viable. They've done research studies about that. So here's the brand new thing that just came. I mean, I was being the police, trying so hard to keep seeds out of city facilities. And so we would always gather, if you don't compost, you can gather, you know, you're going to have a 6-inch plant, a 1-foot plant, a 1.5-foot plant. You gather them with all the seed pods right above your hand, all these different lengths going down. And then when your hand gets full, you just cut off those seed pads and you stick them in a bag. And I was putting those in the trash. If you don't have an acre of them, you know, you can do that too. And the rest of the plant can be hung out to dry. That's the devil in the details. If you don't understand that piece I just said, then just bag the whole thing. Bag it or compost it. So now,
I was just curious, why can't you use plastic? I mean, doesn't that like superheat it?
well, you know,
And kill the
if it's in the sun, it could. It'll get slimy.
Okay.
But the nice thing is, you could do that if you want to. It's nice when you use the fabric, the whole thing's just going to sink. And believe it or not, in a year or two, it's going to be flat with the ground, but you know that there's a lot of seeds in there. And then I would just keep adding to that spot, keep using that fabric over and over, open that up, put your plants in, and it's going to sink back to the ground again.
Okay, so you just, that's your compost site, then you don't use that.
Yeah, so you don't use that, yeah, separate from your other compost. But now, believe it or not, you can actually bring the bags to Public Works. We have an official leaf drop, which ends in May. But sometimes if people bring it, the city staff has been putting it in the leaf drop, which eventually goes to a facility where they're supposedly composting. The state law is that you have to find out where that material is going to go and ask them every year, are you turning that compost? Does it get up to the temperature for decomposition? It's a little sketchy, not knowing where that's going to go, and so the Department of Agriculture would like you to compost it right on your property in one spot year after year. That make sense? All right. So now, when pulling, I always have to go into this because there's some plants that are native wildflowers that aren't so showy. And people say, oh, I always pull that out. It's just a weed. Well, what is a weed? What if it's just a plant that evolved here and it's just not very showy? Now, see this plant? This is a plant that really gets a bad rap. This is a nice little fuzzy ball, but it doesn't stick to your hair so that you have to cut it out. It does not stick to your socks so that you want to throw your socks away. If you walk through the woods and had something that is so sticky you want to get rid of your sweater, it's called stickseed. It's a native plant. And people will think that anything that has a little ball like this is that nasty plant. And they'll start ripping it out. This is a nice woodland ground cover. It's called Enchanter's Nightshade. And of course, it's got a common name that is mixed up with another species that's a weed, but it helps to learn your plants. And yes, if you want to pull it out of your garden is your property. You can do whatever you want. But if you're working with us and volunteering in the parks, people sometimes will take liberty and start pulling out other things as well, which is why we ask people to come, and get some training before they do some volunteer work, because we don't want to pull out these native plants, even though they might look weedy. There's a couple plants. I can't go too far about that. But we want anything that's native that's going to be a ground cover, that's going to occupy space that would otherwise be occupied by garlic mustard and something worse. And so if we get to this identification point right here, aha. So here is, so I talked to you about, I started to talk about invasive versus aggressive. So I really hope that everyone will talk about native plants that might be aggressive, that might be prolific, in the context of being aggressive instead of invasive, because they belong here. And a lot of plants that are aggressive are pioneer species that will come in after disturbance. Now, if we were talking about buckthorn, we'd be talking about elm and box elder and cottonwood, and those that come in, green ash, that come in quickly. They have seeds that float on the wind. Yes. So I wanted to talk about an annual. So remember we talked about annual, biennial, perennial? Here is your friend. This plant is your friend. This little plant right now is germinating, and right now these two big cotyledons, the cotyledons are the first, they're called the seed leaf of a plant, a seed leaf. It does not look at all like the original, the plant leaf that's going to come, but they're the seedlings. It's called jewelweed. It's native, it's annual, it grows fast, and it competes with garlic mustard. It competes. It's not going to magically eliminate your garlic mustard. You still have to pull it. But if you were to go to Victory Evergreen Park, anybody know where Evergreen Park is? Victoria Evergreen. It's a small park. You have to look it up. But there's a section of wetland edge there is literally about 1/4 of an acre of jewelweed, and we don't ever have to weed in that section of the park because this plant is a beautiful ground cover. Every year it sprinkles out the seed, every year it dies to the ground, every year it regerminates brand new. And it's a wonderful plant, and I'd love to go on and talk about it. It's a great way to get kids interested. Anyway, so we also have some resources. If you don't know what plants are, here is a website. If you just Google DNR invasive terrestrial plants, you will come up with this booklet, which I was just ecstatic about 15 years ago. You don't need to, it's all online now. And so the invasive species that are in this booklet, there are some that are really bad and some that are not so bad. So if you are want a pristine prairie and daisies are on the prairie, you'd be taking out the daisies. Daisies are in this book. I'm not messing with daisies at all. I'm dealing with the prohibited noxious weeds. Those are the ones that we really have to prioritize and go after. What else? So, even better than this book, we are so lucky. We are so lucky. There are a couple of botanists in Minnesota that were frustrated that they had to go to so many websites to get the information they needed, and so many books and so many references and all the conflicting information that Katie Chayka started MinnesotaWildflowers.info. Started out with wildflowers, and then it went to almost every plant in the state of Minnesota. And it is phenomenal. There it is, MinnesotaWildflowers.info. If you were to get, so we have, just say we had, well, there's lots of mustards. There are yellow flowering mustards and white flowering mustards. Some are native, some are non-native. Most of them are non-native. But you can go type in the search box mustard, and a whole list with a single photograph of all the mustards found in Minnesota will be there. And you can click on those, and you can read about the mustards, and you get one, and you think you've got it right. And in the notes section, she will tell you what this plant, if there's a look-alike, what is that plant that it looks just like? That would be hard to confuse it with. And then you can click on it, and you can compare and contrast. It's just like, it's a dream. It's a dream. So that is one to copy down. I have some little cards of MinnesotaWildflowers.info up here that you can grab if you want to. It's wonderful. So I didn't have that when I was in college. They didn't, and that's wonderful. So her mission accomplished. That was their goal. Alrighty. Now, okay, so here's that perennial vine I was telling you about. We've got two vines, two very common vines. We have more than two vines in Minnesota, but two are very, very common. One is our wild grape, which has actually responded to the extra carbon that we have in the atmosphere now, so it's growing more aggressively. So we have to pay attention to what the wild grape is growing on. If it's growing on a species that you really like or that you planted, it's a good idea to get rid of it. We don't get rid of it all over in Minnetonka if it's on a pioneer species, if it's on an elm or a box elder or a green ash or something that's not a super high value. You know, it's a pioneer species where forest succession eventually takes over. Then we leave it. But if we plant something in a cage, and you'll notice here, there is a plant cage right there. You see that plant cage? The cage is to keep the deer away from it so that the plant top can get out away free. These vines will crawl up that cage. It wants to do that and have these delicate little tendrils. Wild grape has thick tendrils that are woody that can actually strangle a branch. This is Kinzel Park. And there's a volunteer at Kinzel Park that has pulled all the garlic mustard there for 15 years on the west half of the park. And this just automatically came in on its own. It was there, and now it's more prolific. This is Kinzel Park, and it's a beautiful fall color. And that is your immediate ground cover, if you want to have an immediate ground cover. Most people, nobody just takes me up on this. I have a lot of it. It came in on my property on its own, probably from a bird dropping. And now there's a little bit too much of it, so I'm always sharing plants because finally it reached a critical mass. But if you want, please contact me. I have plenty of plants in my yard, and it just breaks my heart. I don't want to compost wildflowers, but I want a path, and I have to go like this to get through, and I'd much rather give them to people who want them than to compost them. So that's why we dug today and brought plants for you. Alrighty, so woodbine is not frost grape. So if you take it's not a grapevine, so pay attention to which vine is which. And you can talk about afterwards how to identify those, but it becomes too long if I go through all of that. So now we're into another technique. This is not, you're still gonna have garlic mustard if you weed whack. But what weed whacking does is buy you time. If you've got a huge patch and you know it's maturing too fast and there's no way you're going to get it all pulled in time, you can buy yourself by time. This is Burwell House in the background. That was like 2000, I mean, that was after we did our first buckthorn cut. There's barely any garlic mustard there anymore. Makes me so happy. So we had to hire a contractor, which is way too much. We couldn't pull all that. There's no way. So we hired a contractor to come in and weed whack. And if you get it at just the right time, you know, right at the, see, this is a little bit late. We'd like to have it right at flowering or when the seed pods are a little bit shorter than this. And you weed whack it down to the ground. The literature would say 90, 98, 99% death. That's absolutely false, not true. Because this is a wood, and so you can't get down to the ground. There's debris all over the place. There's logs and things, and so, you know, you usually got down this far. Now, some will die. I'd say 70% could die, not 90, but 70, and that's nice if you can drop down the population down to 30%. But then you've got to come back in the summer because if you look in the upper, ooh, this is the next slide coming up. So this is coming back in July and saying, okay, we weed whacked it down, but now it's growing up again, and you're just making it reflower. So if you cut off the flower, it's just like deadheading your flowers in your garden. Why do you deadhead? So you can get more blooms, right? So that's deadheading. So then it went up and it flowered again, and it started to produce seed pods. So those seed pods are still there. And if you don't get those, you've got just as much next year, right? But it buys you time to come out and do that if you can come back out and do that. Some of them died. Does that make sense? It's only if you're overwhelmed, there's no way you can get it. And that last slide was a really good example. I mean, there's no way you're pulling 2 acres. So, buys you some time. And so then, of course, I had to bring some samples in and put them on the desk at the office. And here's one that was not weed whacked, and it's got a bunch of seed pods up here. And one that was weed whacked, and that's got seed pods too. I didn't count them all. A researcher would have counted them all. But so, it's just saying. Pardon me? Oh, I already wrote that there. I did count them. I said I didn't count them. That was a lot of years ago. So it says it's produced about 50% fewer seed pods. Is this a good control method? No. When and why? Yes, when and why. So I already explained that. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's 50% less. If you're still going to have a whole lot of seeds coming out right there, and then they're going to last for 11 years, you got to get the seed pods out. Anyway, but it's a stopgap. It buys you time. It gives you longer into the season. So usually you've got to have all the garlic mustard out because the seed pods are splitting open in early July. If you weed whack it, you can go deeper into July because those seed pods aren't going to be splitting with the other ones. Does that make sense? Because they're starting over.
You're going to pull in July then? You're going to go back and pull them?
Yeah, pull and dig. Yep. But there's fewer, quite a few, many fewer than there was before. Alrighty, so here we are. The question was, for those who are watching on video, was you have to go back and pull them. Yes, you do. Pull or dig. You have to go back and pull or dig. All right, prescribed fire. We are going to get ramped up again and do more prescribed fire. We have some new people on staff who got approved to do prescribed burning here in the city. We, in the past, have used contractors, but the contractors are so busy that it's really hard to schedule one. And then, of course, there's a burn ban like there is right now. And it's just really hard. It might take you 3 or 4 years, but we're going to start burning. We're going to start on a small scale. This is Jadana Island. I call it Picnic Island or Deer Island. It's the main island if you go to Jadana Park. Notice they burned a swath around the island so that it wouldn't burn all the way down the creek. Anyway, my point here is to say that some garlic mustard will be killed with a burn, some will not. It's a very green, moist plant, and sometimes the fire will go right around it. So there the fire went through, the garlic mustard's still alive. It died in patchy spots, and it was beneficial because right away afterwards, you wouldn't believe the woolly sweet Cicely germinated like crazy. I thought, oh my gosh, that's cool. So a native wildflower germinated right away after the fire. So you just have to know it's not a cure-all, and you still have to keep pulling, right? But some areas are patchy and good. All right, chemical herbicide control. The devil's in the details. I'm going to read this because there's some really good information. So it's a dormant season herbicide, early spring, usually April in Minnesota. Right now is the time if you wanted to spray. If you have a solid ground cover, it's not a bad idea to spray. The problem is if you've got wildflowers mixed in, those are going to get sprayed as well with your herbicide. Now I've got some tricks for that. I mean, if you wanted to, you could put in some wire flags and mark them and then pull around those first. That was my technique. Put the wire flag where the wildflower is, pull around that first, and then you can spray the others that haven't been marked. So if you spray, there's garlic mustard of all different sizes. So I sent some small ones around that have the S curve, but then there's some big ones that top over the little ones. So if you spray the big one and there's a little one under next to it, this one's going to die, but all of a sudden when this one dies, all of a sudden this one can take off, right? That happens all the time. So you just have to understand, if you're going to spray, you must come back and pull. And it's usually about 3 weeks later. You've got to come back and find, so it's about 80% of them die in the spray, and some of them don't. When they get into the bolt stage, they're not as chemically susceptible. A lot of times they'll just grow right out of it. They're more vulnerable when they're low right now. But you have to follow it up with pulling, otherwise you wasted your time. Because if 20% come up and they flower and they produce seed, you're back where you started. All right. So glyphosate active ingredient is the active ingredient in Roundup and Rodeo. These are now generic brand. Glyphosate is a generic product. So you can go to any Home Depot or Menards and find a glyphosate herbicide. And they're going to have different concentrations. There's a little box on the bottom of the herbicide bottle, and that little box is going to tell you the active ingredient and the percentage. If you're doing buckthorn, you have to have at least 20%. If you're doing herbaceous sprays, you have to have about 5 or 6%. And a lot of times they'll sell it as concentrate, 10%, and then you dilute it down. I can't talk any more about that, but you just have to be really conscious that you have to use the foliar concentration. So it'll work better in the rosette stage. It won't work very well if it's in the bolting stage. And some of our contractors will add a surfactant to it to get it to stick better. And so it's a little bit more technical. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. But you must follow it up with hand pulling. I already said that. What about the non-target plants? Native to wildflowers. I covered that. 2,4-D is not recommended. 2,4-D transports through the soil. Glyphosate does not. 2,4-D can kill trees. So if you like your trees, don't be using that in your woods at all. Okay. So this is biological control. I started to tell you about this a little while ago, earlier in the talk. So that's Laura Van Riper, who did a 15 to 20 year research project. They chose about 6 sites in the metro area, the metropolitan area, to do this study, where they set these little half-meter plots. There were about 6 of them, and each year they came out and counted how many were second year, how many were first year, how much was vegetated, the density, all of that, year after year after year. Had loads and loads of data. And those 6 sites, nobody could pull garlic mustard because they wanted to see how it behaved naturally. So we never pulled in Hillway Park. The benefit to that was that when the insect got, well, I'm going to back up. When you're doing biological control research, there are researchers, the DNR hires a biological firm in Switzerland to study how many insects eat that plant in its home territory. And then they start bringing them and quarantine them in a greenhouse. And then they subject them to all of our native plants. Oh my gosh. They do these studies to see, will it eat exclusively garlic mustard, or will it eat other plants as well? If it eats other plants, forget it. We're not going to import it. We're not going to release it. It's been in the research for 20 years. And boy, I was really, really hopeful. A number of times they finished their research study, and it got stuck in the approval process. And sometimes there might be a garlic mustard some remote place that they're worried about, a native mustard of some sort that they're worried that the insect would eat. And so it was just kept getting stopped up, and they would send them back into the greenhouse and give them a whole new list of plants, and they'd have to start over and get funding over. That's a lot of work when you think you've got the work done and then the bar changes. And so that's happened 3 times now. And then they ran out of funding. And so now it's floating out there somewhere in the approval process. And Laura Van Riper, she's now the head of the DNR invasive species program. And she says, basically, call your congressman. Ask them to approve it. They've released the beetles in Canada, the biological control beetles, but it's not been approved here. That's what I know. And there are people who have worked on this almost their whole career that are starting to retire. It's pretty sad. Okay. Minnesota DNR has applied to get federal government to release the weevils at 12 field test sites statewide. So what was going to happen was, if we had the beetle release and it was approved, Hilloway Park was going to be one of the places that they removed it because they had all that data. And then they'd follow them and see how they progressed when they ate in the biological control. So we have a biological control success story in Minnesota, and that's the purple loosestrife. In the 1990s, our wetlands were just solid purple. And now the beetles are out there. They're not killing them completely. They fluctuate, and their life cycle goes, the population of beetles go up and down, and then the flowering goes up and down. But it's a good success story. So, and this is why we will always have garlic mustard. This is one of our volunteer events years ago, and this volunteer found a garlic mustard with 1 silique. No flowers. How do you find that? And how do you find that when it's not when it's flowering is the easiest time to go out and pull garlic mustard, because you can find those flowers. But once the flowers are gone and it's in the silique stage, they're difficult to find. And so there's always going to be some around, because they're always going to. So here on the left, we have 1 garlic mustard plant with the siliques right there in a whole patch of native plants. I think we have Canada anemone in here. A whole patch of Canada anemone and 1 garlic mustard plant coming out. It's very hard to spot. So just showing you. I was very, well, never mind. So, are you overwhelmed? I don't want you to be. Where do you start? Find the wildflowers that you have. If you've got wildflowers that are blooming, go pull around those first. Mark the wildflower locations. I am remiss in the city of Minnetonka. We've not had enough help in the past, but now we have more staff, which is wonderful. And so we've got old white wire flags. If you were to go to Burwell Woods, that, for example, there's old white wire flags where there used to be wildflowers. And a lot of that, we're starting to clean up a lot of that, all right? So just didn't have enough staff, but we're working on it. So we've got Virginia waterleaf in here, a native plant. You see these leaves that look different right here? It's a little light spot on there. They call it waterleaf because they kind of look like water blotches. I have a whole bunch of these that if you would like to take some home tonight, we have 2 species. We have wild ginger and Virginia waterleaf. And they both create great ground covers. One of your handouts shows, those pictures were all taken from my yard because those are the ones that proliferate very nicely, with the exception of yellow violets, which are harder. But I just put all the violets together, but that's the right sheet. That is the correct sheet. All of those are wonderful replacement plants for garlic mustard in a shady area. Now, one of them just shows you the Virginia creeper, or the woodbine, which is, I already told you about the vine that forms a ground cover. But they're very easy to propagate, all of these. And the thing that was really interesting, I don't spray for ants, I don't spray for spiders or anything on my property, and the ants spread the seeds of these wild ginger plants. And so now it's taken a really long time. In the beginning, my patch could not, it was just sat there and sat there and sat there. And then all of a sudden, now I've got it all over my property. And same with the Virginia waterleaf. So this is a really beautiful plant to plant with hostas, because there's the differing sizes, differing textures. The Virginia waterleaf I would not put in your formal garden. It belongs in your woods because it will start seeding, and and start to maybe become a few too many. But in the woods, wouldn't that be wonderful? Okay, so highest priority plants to remove the garlic mustard in good habitats. So if we've got a park that is just wall-to-wall garlic mustard, that's not the place we're going to go for high priority. We're going to go to where we've got good wildflower populations left over. We're going to go to the best habitats and try and take care of those. The ones that are the worst habitats are low on the priority list because they just suck all of your resources. So we've got to find those populations and work on those. And we have for years and years and years. If you walk the trails at Lone Lake Park, we've been pulling garlic mustard there for 16, 17 years. And it looks beautiful. Yeah. All right. So the most effective control of garlic mustard is the prevention of its initial establishment. Well, you don't have choice about that. You've already got it. But in July, when the seed pods start to open, if we have rain or if we have those, we have a lot of humid days in the summer, right? Really high humidity. When there's moisture, the seeds will stick more to fur of animals. So if the animals are going through the woods, and we got the deer, and we got the raccoons and all of that, then those seeds will stick and they'll go someplace else. Now on your property, it's really nice. It's a good excuse to go out and just walk around. Take your cereal bowl out or whatever, your cup of coffee, and just go walk around in your yard and look at your stuff and what's coming up. And you can see where are the wildflowers and where to pull first, that kind of thing. Find the new invasions and pull them first every year. So your strategy, sometimes you would think, what's our strategy? So I have mountain bikers that do a lot of pulling at Lone Lake Park for us. And we're not going to go after the biggest patch. And that people go, look, wait, look at all that. No, we're going to go comb some of these other areas and then go to the big patch. So we do a little bit of each. When we have a lot of people, it's good to work on the big patches because they get taken care of fast if you're just one person. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Oh, good. I'm glad to see nods. Sometimes I go on and on. So here's some tips to save you time and energy. Some people, it's tempting when you see a whole bunch germinating to start working on those. You can scrape them with a trowel when they're like this, when they're not quite this dense, and you can actually just scrape the soil surface with the trowel and you ruin the plants. But if you get off on that, you have to say to yourself, am I going to have enough time to get all of my second year plants out? That is your goal. Get the second year plants out because they're the ones that are going to produce the seed. So that's April and May. So I got this all written down here. I've said it before. We're going to dig or we're going to pull. We're going to remove the soil from the roots. Going to leave it in the woods without soil contact. No need to bag when it's in the flowering stage. When you're in late May and June, when the seed pods are present, you have to pull the plant and bag the seed tops or compost. Does that make sense? Or so we're having a dividing line there. Once the seed pods, are about an inch long, you have to be taking care of it. I cut them off to stop their development, and then I hang the plants back up in the tree. If you wait until the plants are this big, we'll have volunteer events, and they're this big, you can't do that because once they're this big, half of the plant will be seed pods, and you can't be cutting those off. It's just too late. You have to compost then. Make a compost pile. All righty. First year plants, I wouldn't mess with them at all unless you have a favorite garden that they're in. If you've got a favorite place that you're just tending to because you love it and it's your perfect garden, then sure, take your trowel and dig them out, but it's after all the others are gone. But you can think to yourself, you actually have until June of next year before they have to be dealt with. And if they come up at a huge density, 80% of those are going to be dead next year. When they're the following year, the spacing, if it's in a really dense place, the spacing is always about 3 inches apart, 3 to 4 inches apart. So that means a lot of plants died in that period of time. Alrighty. How about that? I think that's the end.